The morning sun cast long shadows across the cobblestone courtyard of Kensington Palace as 8-year-old Prince George walked alongside his father, Prince William. It was a Tuesday in late October, and the autumn air carried the crisp promise of winter. George's small hands were tucked deep into the pockets of his navy wool coat, his breath creating small puffs of vapor in the cool morning air. This had become their weekly tradition. Every Tuesday morning, father and son would take a walk around the palace grounds before George's tutoring sessions began. William cherished these quiet moments with his eldest child, away from the constant buzz of royal duties and public appearances. For George, these walks were a chance to ask questions that had been bubbling up in his young mind throughout the week. As they approached the main gate, George noticed the familiar figure of Guard Captain James Morrison standing at attention. Captain Morrison had been stationed at various royal residences for nearly 15 years, and his presence had become as reliable as the changing of the seasons. The man stood perfectly still, his red uniform immaculate, his black bearskin hat positioned precisely on his head. George had always been fascinated by the guards. Their unwavering discipline, their perfect posture, their ability to stand motionless for hours. It all seemed magical to a young boy who could barely sit still during his history lessons. He had asked his father countless questions about them over the years. Why did they wear such tall hats? How long could they stand without moving? Did they ever get tired? Today something was different. As George and his father passed by the guard post, the young prince slowed his pace. Captain Morrison's usual stern expression seemed softer somehow, and George noticed something that made his heart skip a beat. There, barely visible beneath the shadow of the guard's hat, was a single tear slowly making its way down the weathered cheek. George stopped walking entirely, causing his father to pause and look back. "What is it, George?" Prince William asked gently, following his son's gaze to the guard. The young prince didn't answer immediately. Instead, he studied Captain Morrison's face more carefully. The guard's eyes were slightly red, and though he maintained his rigid posture, there was an unmistakable sadness radiating from his entire being. George had seen that look before. On his mother's face when she spoke about her grandmother, on his teacher's face when her pet dog had passed away. Without saying a word to his father, George slowly approached the guard. Captain Morrison's training kept him facing forward, but George could see the slight movement in the man's eyes as he acknowledged the young prince's presence. The courtyard fell silent except for the distant sound of London traffic beyond the palace walls. George reached into his coat pocket and pulled out something small. It was a chocolate biscuit from his breakfast, wrapped carefully in a napkin. His grandmother, Queen Elizabeth, had always told him that sharing food was one of the oldest ways of showing kindness. The young prince had been saving this particular biscuit for his afternoon break, but something told him it was needed elsewhere. Standing on his tiptoes, George gently placed the wrapped biscuit at the base of the guard post, right beside Captain Morrison's polished black boots. He didn't say anything, didn't try to get the guard's attention, didn't make a grand gesture. He simply left his small gift and stepped back. Captain Morrison's composure never wavered, but George noticed the almost imperceptible nod of acknowledgement, the slight relaxation in the man's shoulders. The tear that had been threatening to fall finally did, landing silently on the guard's red tunic. Prince William watched this entire exchange with growing amazement. His son had demonstrated a level of empathy and understanding that many adults never achieved. George hadn't asked questions, hadn't demanded explanations, hadn't tried to fix whatever was wrong. He had simply recognized pain and responded with kindness. As they continued their walk, George remained unusually quiet. His father wanted to ask about what had just happened, but something told him to let his son process the moment on his own terms. They completed their circuit of the grounds in comfortable silence, both lost in their own thoughts. When they returned to the palace entrance, Captain Morrison was still at his post, but the small wrapped biscuit was gone. George smiled to himself, knowing that his simple gesture had been received and appreciated. He didn't know what was causing the guard's sadness, but he understood that sometimes the smallest acts of kindness could make the biggest difference. That evening at dinner, George finally spoke about the morning's events. "Papa," he said carefully, "why was the guard crying today?" Prince William set down his fork and looked at his son thoughtfully. "Sometimes, George, people are going through difficult times. Even adults, even people who seem very strong, can feel sad or worried about things. George nodded solemnly. I wanted to help him feel better. And you did, his father replied with a warm smile. You showed him that someone cared, and that means more than you might think. As George prepared for bed that night, he couldn't stop thinking about Captain Morrison. He wondered if the guard had a family, if he had children of his own, if he lived far from the palace. Most importantly, he wondered if his small gift had truly made a difference. Little did the young prince know that this simple act of compassion would soon reveal a story that would touch the hearts of everyone in the palace. Captain James Morrison had been keeping a secret that weighed heavier on his heart with each passing day. As he stood at his post that Tuesday morning, the small chocolate biscuit from Prince George tucked safely in his pocket, his mind drifted to the phone call he had received 3 days earlier. Dad, the doctors say it's spreading faster than they expected. The voice of his daughter Sarah echoed in his memory, each word like a knife through his chest. Sarah was 23, fresh out of university, and full of dreams for her future. She had been diagnosed with leukemia 6 months ago, and despite the treatments, the news kept getting worse. Morrison had joined the Royal Guard 15 years ago as a young man of 25, proud to serve the crown and provide for his growing family. Sarah had been just 8 years old then, the same age as Prince George now. She used to visit him at work sometimes during school holidays, her eyes wide with wonder at the grandeur of the palace and the precision of the ceremonies. My daddy protects the queen, she would tell anyone who would listen, her chest puffed out with pride. Morrison remembered how she would practice marching around their small garden, mimicking his movements, saluting invisible royalty with serious concentration. Now, as he maintained his vigil at the palace gates, Morrison's thoughts were consumed by hospital visits, treatment schedules, and mounting medical bills. His wife Margaret had taken leave from her job as a school secretary to care for Sarah full-time. The financial pressure was enormous, but that wasn't what kept Morrison awake at night. It was the look in his daughter's eyes when she thought, no one was watching, the fear, the exhaustion, the brave face she put on for everyone else's sake. The wrapped biscuit in his pocket seemed to burn with warmth. Prince George's innocent gesture had touched something deep within Morrison's soul. The young prince had seen his pain without knowing its source, and had responded with pure compassion. It reminded Morrison of Sarah at that age, always quick to offer a hug or share her sweets when someone seemed sad. As the morning progressed, Morrison found himself thinking about the conversation he would have to have with his commanding officer later that day. He had been putting it off for weeks, but time was running out. Sarah's condition was deteriorating, and the doctors had suggested a new experimental treatment available at a specialist hospital in Switzerland. The treatment offered hope, but it would require Morrison to take extended leave. Leave that might jeopardize his position and the steady income his family desperately needed. The morning shift change approached, and Morrison knew his replacement, Sergeant Davies, would arrive soon. Davies was a good man, reliable and kind, and one of the few people at the palace who knew about Sarah's illness. Morrison had sworn him to secrecy, not wanting pity or special treatment from his colleagues. How's the little one doing? Davies asked quietly as he took his position. Morrison's jaw tightened. Not well. The new round of chemotherapy isn't working as hoped. Davies nodded grimly. He had a daughter of his own, and the thought of facing such a situation made his stomach turn. You know we're all thinking of you, right? If there's anything any of us can do. I appreciate that, Morrison replied, his voice thick with emotion. There might be something soon. I'll know more after I speak with the colonel this afternoon. As Morrison walked toward the guardhouse to change out of his uniform, he felt the weight of Prince George's gift in his pocket. Such a small gesture from such a young child, yet it had provided more comfort than he had felt in weeks. The prince had no idea that his simple act of kindness had come at exactly the moment when Morrison needed to remember that there was still goodness in the world. In the privacy of the changing room, Morrison carefully unwrapped the chocolate biscuit. He wasn't hungry, but he took a small bite anyway, savoring the sweetness and the love behind the gift. He thought about how he would tell Sarah about this moment when he visited her that evening. She had always loved hearing stories about the royal children, especially Prince George, who was close to her age. Morrison's phone buzzed with a text message from Margaret, Sarah's asking for you. The pain medication is making her sleepy, but she wants to see you before her afternoon rest." He quickly finished changing and gathered his things. The conversation with his commanding officer would have to wait until tomorrow. Tonight, he needed to be with his daughter, to hold her hand and tell her about the young prince who had shown such unexpected kindness to a worried father. As he left the palace grounds, Morrison made a silent promise to himself. Whatever happened in the coming weeks, whatever sacrifices he had to make, he would find a way to fight for Sarah's life. And someday, if the opportunity arose, he would find a way to thank Prince George for reminding him that even in the darkest times, there were still moments of light. The autumn afternoon was growing cold, and Morrison pulled his civilian coat tighter around himself as he headed toward the hospital. In his pocket, the napkin from Prince George's biscuit rustled softly against his fingers, a tangible reminder of hope when hope seemed impossible to find. He didn't know it yet, but his story was about to take an unexpected turn, one that would reveal the true power of compassion and the extraordinary things that could happen when kindness met courage at exactly the right moment. The next morning, Captain Morrison sat rigidly in the chair across from Colonel Harrison's mahogany desk. The office walls were lined with photographs of the colonel's distinguished military career, medals gleaming behind glass cases, and formal portraits of various members of the royal family. Despite the grandeur surrounding him, Morrison felt smaller than he ever had in his life. Colonel Harrison was a fair man. Morrison knew that. In his 12 years of service under Harrison's command, he had never been treated with anything but respect and understanding. But asking for extended leave during such uncertain times felt like professional suicide, especially when Morrison couldn't guarantee when or if he would be able to return to full duty. "You look troubled, Captain," Colonel Harrison observed, setting aside the morning reports he had been reviewing. "What's on your mind?" Morrison straightened his shoulders, drawing on 15 years of military training to steady his voice. "Sir, I need to request extended family leave. My daughter, she's very ill, and she needs specialized treatment that will require my presence for an indefinite period." The colonel's expression softened immediately. He had met Sarah several times over the years during family events at the palace. She was a bright, cheerful girl who had always been polite and curious about palace life. "How serious is her condition?" "Leukemia, sir. Advanced stages. The doctors are recommending an experimental treatment program in Switzerland. It's her best chance, but it could take months and there's no guarantee of success." Colonel Harrison leaned back in his chair, his fingers steepled in front of him. Morrison could see the wheels turning in his superior's mind, calculating schedules, budgets, and personnel requirements. The Royal Guard operated on strict protocols, and unexpected absences created significant logistical challenges. "I understand the difficulty of your request." "Sir?" Morrison continued before the colonel could respond. "I know it puts the unit in a difficult position. I'm prepared to resign my commission if necessary." "Don't be hasty, Captain," Harrison said firmly. "You're one of our most reliable guards. Losing you permanently would be a significant blow to our operations." Morrison felt his heart sink. He had expected this response, but hearing it out loud made the reality of his situation crystal clear. His job provided the health insurance that was covering Sarah's current treatments, limited though they were. Losing his position would mean losing that coverage at the worst possible time. However, the colonel continued, "Family emergencies require special consideration. Tell me more about this treatment program." For the next 20 minutes, Morrison explained everything he knew about the experimental therapy in Switzerland. The costs were staggering even with insurance coverage. The time commitment was substantial, at least 4 months of intensive treatment followed by an uncertain recovery period. Most challenging of all, there was no guarantee that Sarah would be well enough to travel, let alone survive the rigorous treatment protocol. Colonel Harrison listened without interruption, occasionally jotting notes on a pad of paper. When Morrison finished speaking, the office fell into a heavy silence that seemed to stretch on forever. "Captain Morrison," the colonel finally said, "in my 30 years of military service, I've learned that good soldiers are defined not just by their dedication to duty, but by their commitment to the values that duty represents: family loyalty, sacrifice, and honor. These are the principles that make a man worthy of protecting the crown." Morrison felt a flicker of hope. but he remained cautiously silent. "I cannot guarantee that your position will remain available indefinitely," Harrison continued, "but I can approve a 6-month family leave of absence with partial pay continuation. If you need additional time beyond that, we'll evaluate the situation based on circumstances." The relief that washed over Morrison was so intense that he had to grip the arms of his chair to keep from breaking down entirely. "Sir, thank you. I cannot express how much this means to my family." "There is one condition," the colonel added. "I need you to keep me informed of your daughter's progress. If there are any developments that might affect your timeline, I want to know immediately. And, Captain, I want you to know that everyone in the unit will be thinking of Sarah. She's fought bravely against this illness, and we're all rooting for her recovery." Morrison stood and saluted sharply. "Yes, sir. Thank you, sir. I will not forget this kindness." As Morrison left the colonel's office, his mind was already racing with the logistics of the weeks ahead. He needed to contact the Swiss hospital, arrange travel documents, coordinate with Sarah's current medical team, and prepare Margaret for the enormous upheaval their lives were about to undergo. But underneath all the practical concerns, Morrison felt something he hadn't experienced in months: genuine hope. The path ahead was still uncertain and frightening, but for the first time since Sarah's diagnosis, he felt like they had a real chance to fight for her life without sacrificing everything else in the process. That evening, as Morrison sat beside Sarah's hospital bed, he told her about the colonel's decision and the possibility of treatment in Switzerland. Sarah's eyes, though tired from the medication, sparkled with the first real excitement he had seen from her in weeks. "Really, Dad? We can go to Switzerland? Will I get to see the mountains?" Morrison squeezed her hand gently. "Yes, sweetheart. You'll see the mountains, and if everything goes according to plan, you'll get better while you're there." As Sarah drifted off to sleep that night, Morrison thought about Prince George's simple gesture from the day before. The young prince couldn't have known that his small act of kindness would coincide with such a pivotal moment in Morrison's life, but somehow it felt connected. In a world that often seemed harsh and unforgiving, these unexpected moments of compassion reminded him that miracles were still possible. 3 days after Morrison's meeting with Colonel Harrison, Prince William found himself thinking about his son's unusual behavior during their Tuesday morning walk. George had been quieter than usual since the encounter with the crying guard, asking thoughtful questions about sadness, helping others, and whether grown-ups ever felt scared. That Thursday afternoon, while George was in his piano lesson, Prince William made an unexpected decision. He walked down to the main security office to speak with Colonel Harrison about the guard his son had approached. As a future king, William believed in understanding the people who served his family, and something about that moment had stayed with him. "Your Highness," Colonel Harrison stood immediately as Prince William entered his office. "How can I assist you today?" "I wanted to inquire about one of your guards, Captain Morrison, I believe. My son noticed he seemed distressed the other day, and I wanted to ensure everything was all right." Colonel Harrison's expression became carefully neutral. Personnel matters were confidential, but he also understood Prince William's genuine concern for the people around him. "Captain Morrison is dealing with a family situation, sir. Nothing that affects his duties or security protocols, but it is a challenging personal matter." Prince William nodded thoughtfully. He had learned from his mother, Princess Diana, that sometimes the most important conversations happened when you showed genuine interest in people's lives rather than just their professional obligations. "Would it be appropriate for me to ask about the nature of his situation? My son was quite affected by seeing him upset, and if there's any way we might offer support?" After a moment's hesitation, Colonel Harrison decided that Captain Morrison's story deserved to be heard, especially by someone in a position to understand the weight of family responsibility. "His daughter has leukemia, sir. Advanced stages. He's been approved for extended leave to pursue experimental treatment in Switzerland, but the financial and emotional burden is enormous." Prince William felt his stomach tighten. As a father himself, he couldn't imagine facing such a situation. The thought of George or Charlotte or Louis fighting for their lives was unbearable. "How old is his daughter?" 23, sir. A lovely young woman. She used to visit the palace occasionally when she was younger, always very polite and interested in everything she saw." Prince William was quiet for a long moment, processing this information. Finally, he asked, What would be most helpful for Captain Morrison right now, practically speaking? Honestly, sir, the leave of absence is the most important thing, and that's been arranged. The experimental treatment is expensive, but his insurance covers most of it. Really, I think what he needs most is the knowledge that he has support from people who understand that family comes first. I'd like to meet with him, Prince William said suddenly. Would that be possible? Colonel Harrison looked surprised. Of course, sir. He's scheduled to work tomorrow morning before beginning his leave preparations. Would you like me to arrange a private meeting? Yes, but I'd like my son to be there as well. George has been asking about the guard, and I think it would be meaningful for both of them. The next morning, Captain Morrison received an unexpected summons to report to the colonel's office immediately after his shift. He assumed it was related to final paperwork for his leave, but when he entered the office and saw Prince William and Prince George waiting alongside Colonel Harrison, his heart nearly stopped. Your Highness. Morrison snapped to attention and saluted sharply. Please, Captain Morrison, sit down. Prince William gestured to a chair. My son has something he'd like to say to you. George looked up at his father uncertainly, then stepped forward toward Morrison. I wanted to know if you're feeling better, he said simply. You looked very sad the other day. Morrison felt his throat tighten with emotion. He looked down at the young prince, seeing genuine concern in his eyes. Thank you for asking, Your Highness. I was feeling sad because someone I love very much is sick. George nodded solemnly. My papa told me about your daughter. I hope she gets better soon. Thank you, Morrison managed to say. That's very kind of you. Prince William stepped forward. Captain Morrison, Colonel Harrison has told me about your daughter's situation. As a father, I cannot imagine what you're going through right now. I wanted you to know that you have the full support of this family during this difficult time. Morrison struggled to maintain his composure. I appreciate that more than I can express, sir. There's something else, Prince William continued. George has been asking if there's anything we can do to help. He mentioned that sharing food is one way to show kindness, but he wondered if there might be other ways to help someone who's worried about their family. George reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, hand-drawn card. It was clearly his own artwork. A picture of a girl with long brown hair surrounded by flowers and hearts, with "Get well soon," written in careful, childish handwriting. I made this for your daughter, George said, offering the card to Morrison. I drew her with flowers because flowers make people happy, and I wrote her name on the back because Papa told me it was Sarah. Morrison accepted the card with trembling hands. On the back, in Prince George's careful script, was written, For Sarah Morrison, from Prince George. I hope you feel better soon and get to see the mountains in Switzerland. The normally stoic guard felt tears threatening to spill over. This 8-year-old prince had not only remembered his name and his daughter's situation, but had taken the time to create something personal and meaningful just for Sarah. She's going to treasure this, Morrison said quietly. She's always been fascinated by the royal family, especially the children. This will mean the world to her. Prince William placed a gentle hand on Morrison's shoulder. Captain, we wanted you to know that while you're away caring for your daughter, you remain part of our extended family here. When you're ready to return, whenever that may be, your place will be waiting for you. As Morrison left that meeting, clutching Prince George's handmade card and feeling more supported than he had in months, he realized that sometimes the most powerful help comes not from grand gestures or significant resources, but from simple human connections that remind us we're not facing our battles alone. That evening, Morrison sat beside Sarah's hospital bed, the handmade card from Prince George carefully preserved in a protective plastic sleeve. Sarah had been having a difficult day. The chemotherapy had left her nauseated and exhausted, and the constant stream of medical procedures had worn down her usually bright spirit. Dad, you look different today, Sarah observed weakly, though she managed a small smile, less worried than usual. Morrison took her hand gently, careful not to disturb the IV lines that had become a permanent fixture in her life. I have something special to show you, sweetheart. Something that I think will make you smile. He carefully removed the card from its protective sleeve and handed it to his daughter. Sarah's eyes widened as she took in the colorful drawing, her finger tracing the carefully drawn flowers and hearts. Is this really from Prince George? She whispered, her voice filled with wonder. He made this for me? He did indeed. And he knows your name, and he knows about Switzerland. And he wanted you to know that he's thinking about you. Sarah read the message on the back of the card several times, her eyes growing brighter with each reading. For the first time in weeks, Morrison saw genuine joy on his daughter's face. Not the brave front she put on for the doctors and nurses, but real, unguarded happiness. "Dad, this is the most amazing thing that's ever happened to me," she said, carefully propping the card up on her bedside table where she could see it. "Prince George actually knows who I am." Margaret entered the room carrying 2 cups of coffee from the hospital cafeteria and immediately noticed the change in her daughter's demeanor. "What's got you so excited, love?" Sarah carefully explained about the card, showing her mother every detail of Prince George's artwork. Margaret's eyes filled with tears as she realized the significance of this gesture, not just for Sarah but for her husband, who had been carrying the weight of their family's crisis largely on his own. "There's something else," Morrison said, looking at both his wife and daughter. "Prince William himself met with me today. He wanted me to know that the entire royal family is aware of our situation and that they're supporting us through this." Sarah's eyes grew even wider. "Prince William knows about me too?" "He does, and he wanted me to tell you that you're being very brave and that he's proud of how you're fighting this illness." Over the next few days, Sarah's spirits remained remarkably high. She showed Prince George's card to every nurse, doctor, and visitor who came to her room. The card became a conversation starter, a source of strength, and a reminder that even in the darkest moments, there were still people in the world who cared about others. Dr. Patterson, Sarah's oncologist, noticed the positive change immediately. "Something's different about Sarah this week," she told Morrison during one of their regular consultations. "Her mood has improved dramatically, and that can actually have measurable effects on how well her body responds to treatment." Morrison explained about Prince George's card and the support from the royal family. Dr. Patterson listened with amazement. "You know, Captain Morrison, we see a lot of families going through situations like yours, and one thing I've learned is that hope and emotional support can be just as important as medical treatment. Whatever happened this week, it's given Sarah something powerful to fight for." As the date for their departure to Switzerland approached, Sarah insisted on writing her own thank you card to Prince George. Despite her weakness from the treatments, she spent hours working on it, asking Morrison to help her spell difficult words and making sure every letter was perfect. Her card featured her own drawing of a palace with guards standing proudly at the gates. Inside, she wrote, "Dear Prince George, thank you for my beautiful card. It makes me happy every day. I am going to Switzerland to get better, and I will think about your kindness while I am there. I hope someday I can meet you and say thank you in person. Your friend, Sarah Morrison." Morrison promised to deliver the card personally before they left for Switzerland. As he looked at his daughter's careful artwork and heartfelt words, he realized that something profound had happened over the past week. Sarah wasn't just fighting her illness anymore. She was fighting it with the knowledge that people she admired believed in her, that her story mattered, and that she had reasons beyond her own survival to get better. The night before their departure, Sarah fell asleep holding Prince George's card against her chest. Morrison sat beside her bed, watching the steady rise and fall of her breathing, and felt something he hadn't experienced since her diagnosis: genuine optimism. In the morning, they would begin the most challenging journey of their lives. The experimental treatment in Switzerland was their last best hope, but it would be grueling and uncertain. However, Morrison knew that his daughter would face whatever came next with a strength that went beyond her physical capabilities. She would carry with her the knowledge that a young prince had seen her humanity before he knew her name, that kindness could come from unexpected places, and that sometimes the smallest gestures created the biggest changes. Prince George's simple drawing had reminded Sarah that she was more than her illness. She was a person worthy of love, attention, and hope. As Morrison finally headed home to finish packing for their journey, he understood that they weren't just carrying medical treatments and personal belongings to Switzerland. They were carrying with them a reminder that even in the darkest times, there were still people in the world who chose compassion over indifference, and that sometimes those people wore crowns. The Swiss Alpine Medical Center sat nestled in a valley surrounded by snow-capped mountains, looking more like a luxury resort than a hospital. For Sarah, who had spent the last 6 months surrounded by the sterile walls of London hospitals, the view from her room window was like stepping into a fairy tale. The experimental treatment proved to be even more challenging than Dr. Patterson had warned them. The therapy involved a complex combination of targeted medications, immune system modifications, and intensive monitoring that left Sarah exhausted and often confused. There were days when she barely recognized her parents, and nights when the side effects made sleep impossible. But throughout it all, Prince George's card remained propped on her bedside table, carefully protected in its plastic sleeve. On her worst days, when the treatments left her too weak to speak or eat, Sarah would stare at the colorful drawing and trace the letters of Prince George's message with her finger. Morrison had established a routine of writing weekly letters to Colonel Harrison, updating him on Sarah's progress as requested. What he didn't expect was that these letters would eventually make their way to Prince William, who had asked to be kept informed about the Morrison family's journey. After 6 weeks in Switzerland, Morrison wrote, "Sarah has completed the first phase of treatment. The doctors are cautiously optimistic about her response to the therapy, though she has faced significant challenges. She speaks often about Prince George's card and asked me to tell her again about meeting him. The kindness shown by your family has given her strength that no medicine could provide." Prince William shared these updates with George, who listened intently to every detail about Sarah's treatment and recovery. The young prince had never forgotten about the guard's daughter, and he often asked his father if there was anything more they could do to help. "Can we send her another card?" George asked one evening after hearing the latest news from Switzerland. "I want her to know that I'm still thinking about her." Prince William smiled at his son's persistent compassion. "I think that's a wonderful idea, George. What would you like to tell her this time?" George spent an entire afternoon working on his second card for Sarah. This one featured a drawing of mountains with a girl standing on top, arms raised in victory, surrounded by sunshine and rainbows. His message was simple but powerful. "Dear Sarah, I hope you are feeling stronger. My papa says you are being very brave. I drew you on top of a mountain because you are climbing your way to getting better. Keep fighting! Your friend, Prince George." When Morrison received the package from the palace, Sarah was in the middle of a particularly difficult treatment cycle. She had lost most of her hair. Her appetite was virtually non-existent, and she spent most days sleeping to escape the discomfort of the intensive therapy. But when Morrison showed her Prince George's second card, something remarkable happened. For the first time in weeks, Sarah sat up completely in bed, her eyes clear and focused. "He remembered me," she whispered, studying the mountain drawing with obvious delight. "He really remembered me." Dr. Muller, Sarah's Swiss oncologist, observed this interaction with professional interest. Later, he pulled Morrison aside to discuss what he had witnessed. "Captain Morrison, I've been practicing oncology for 20 years, and I've learned that recovery involves much more than medical treatment. Your daughter's response to these cards demonstrates something we call psychosocial healing, the way emotional and social connections can actually strengthen the body's ability to fight disease." Morrison listened intently as Dr. Muller continued. "Sarah's latest blood work shows marked improvement. Her immune system is responding better than we initially projected. Of course, the medication is doing its job, but I believe these connections to home, these reminders that people care about her, are contributing significantly to her recovery." That evening, Sarah insisted on writing another letter to Prince George despite her weakness. With Morrison's help, she crafted a message that brought tears to her father's eyes. "Dear Prince George, your new card made me so happy that I sat up in bed for the first time in days. I hung it next to your first card so I can see both when I wake up. The doctors say I'm getting stronger, and I think it's partly because of your kindness. I want you to know that when I climb real mountains someday, I will think about you and how you helped me climb this invisible mountain. Thank you for being my friend even though we have never met. Love, Sarah." As the weeks passed, an unexpected correspondence developed between the young prince and the guard's daughter. Prince George would send drawings and encouraging messages, while Sarah would respond with her own artwork and updates about her treatment. Prince William carefully supervised these exchanges, ensuring they remained appropriate while recognizing the genuine friendship that was developing. The letters became a source of hope for Sarah, but they also profoundly affected Prince George. He began asking more questions about illness, about helping others, and about the responsibilities that come with privilege. His parents watched their son develop a deeper understanding of empathy and service that went far beyond what any formal education could have provided. 3 months into the Swiss treatment, Morrison was able to write the letter he had been hoping for since their arrival. Colonel Harrison, I am delighted to report that Sarah has responded remarkably well to the experimental therapy. Her doctors are optimistic about her prognosis, and we expect to return to London within the next month for continued monitoring and follow-up treatment. Sarah asks me to convey her gratitude to Prince George for his continued friendship, which has meant more to her recovery than I can express in words. When Prince William shared this news with George, the 8-year-old prince jumped up from his chair with excitement. "Papa, she's getting better. Sarah's getting better," he exclaimed. "Can we plan something special for when she comes home?" Prince William looked at his son with immense pride. In the space of a few months, George had learned that small acts of kindness could have enormous consequences, that friendship could cross boundaries of age and social position, and that caring for others was one of life's most important responsibilities. "Yes, George," he replied with a warm smile. "I think we can definitely plan something special for Sarah's homecoming." 6 months after leaving for Switzerland, the Morrison family returned to London on a crisp March morning. Sarah walked slowly through Heathrow Airport, her steps careful but steady, wearing a colorful scarf that her mother had knitted to cover her still growing hair. In her carry-on bag, carefully protected in a special folder, were all of Prince George's cards and letters from their time away. The experimental treatment had been successful beyond their most optimistic expectations. Sarah's cancer was in complete remission, and while she would require ongoing monitoring and follow-up treatments, her doctors were cautiously confident about her long-term prognosis. Morrison had resumed his duties at the palace the week before Sarah and Margaret's return, wanting to ensure everything was properly arranged for their homecoming. Colonel Harrison had welcomed him back warmly, and Morrison was touched to discover that his fellow guards had maintained a fund to help offset some of the family's medical expenses. What Morrison didn't know was that Prince William and Prince George had been planning a special welcome home surprise for Sarah. 3 days after the family's reunion, Morrison received an unexpected invitation to bring Sarah and Margaret to the palace for a private tea with Prince William and Prince George. Sarah could barely contain her excitement when her father shared the news. "I'm actually going to meet Prince George?" she asked for the 100th time as Margaret helped her choose what to wear. "And Prince William too?" Morrison watched his daughter fuss over her appearance and felt his heart swell with gratitude. 6 months ago, they had been preparing for the possibility that they might lose her forever. Now she was worried about making a good impression on the royal family, who had shown them such extraordinary kindness. When the Morrison family arrived at Kensington Palace that Thursday afternoon, they were escorted to a private sitting room that Sarah remembered from her childhood visits, though this time, instead of viewing it from the corridors, she was invited to sit in the elegant chairs and be served tea from the finest china. Prince George entered the room with his characteristic mixture of shyness and enthusiasm. At 8 years old, he was still young enough to be genuinely excited about meeting his pen pal, but old enough to understand the significance of the moment. "Sarah," he exclaimed, approaching her with a warm smile, "you look so much better than in the pictures your dad sent us." Sarah laughed, immediately put at ease by Prince George's natural friendliness. "Thank you for all your letters and cards. They helped me so much when I was feeling really sick." Prince William joined them moments later, greeting the Morrison family with genuine warmth and asking detailed questions about Sarah's treatment and recovery. As they settled in for tea, Morrison watched in amazement as his daughter conversed easily with the future king and his son, discussing everything from Swiss mountains to her favorite books. "I brought you something," Prince George said, reaching for a wrapped package beside his chair. "It's not as nice as the cards, but I thought you might like it." Sarah carefully unwrapped the gift to reveal a beautiful leather-bound journal with her name embossed in gold letters on the cover. Inside the front cover, Prince George had written, "For Sarah Morrison, so you can write about all your adventures now that you're better. From your friend, Prince George." "This is the most beautiful thing I've ever owned," Sarah said softly, running her fingers over the smooth leather. "Thank you so much." As the afternoon progressed, Morrison found himself marveling at the surreal nature of the situation. His daughter, who had spent months fighting for her life in a foreign hospital, was now sitting in a royal palace laughing and chatting with Prince George as if they were old school friends. But perhaps more remarkable was watching Prince George himself. The young prince listened intently to Sarah's stories about Switzerland, asked thoughtful questions about her treatment, and showed genuine interest in her hopes for the future. Morrison realized that this friendship had changed Prince George as much as it had helped Sarah. "Your Highness," Sarah said formally as the afternoon drew to a close, "I want to thank you for being my friend when I needed one most. Your cards and letters reminded me that there were good things waiting for me if I could just get better." Prince George looked at her seriously. "You don't have to call me Your Highness. We're friends now. Just call me George." Sarah beamed at this invitation to informality. "Okay, George. And I want you to know that you taught me something very important." "What's that?" George asked curiously. "You taught me that kindness is the most powerful medicine of all." As the Morrison family prepared to leave, Prince William pulled Morrison aside for a private word. "Captain, I wanted you to know that watching this friendship develop has been one of the most meaningful experiences of my son's life. George has learned lessons about compassion, service, and genuine friendship that no formal education could have provided." Morrison felt emotion tighten his throat. "Sir, I cannot begin to express what your family's kindness has meant to us. Sarah is alive today partly because she had hope, and that hope came from knowing that people like your son cared about her." Prince William smiled. "The remarkable thing, Captain, is that George didn't do anything extraordinary. He simply saw someone in pain and responded with kindness. It reminds us that sometimes the most profound gestures are also the simplest ones." 6 months later, Captain Morrison stood once again at his post at the palace gates, but everything had changed. Sarah was healthy and thriving, back at university and studying to become a pediatric nurse, inspired by her own experiences with illness and recovery. She and Prince George continued their friendship, writing letters and occasionally meeting for tea when circumstances allowed. Morrison's colleagues had noticed a change in him too. The worried, distracted man who had struggled to maintain his professional demeanor was gone, replaced by someone who understood firsthand the power of compassion and community support. Every Tuesday morning, when Prince William and Prince George took their weekly walk around the palace grounds, they would pause briefly at Morrison's post. Sometimes George would offer a small wave or a quick smile. Sometimes they would stop to chat about Sarah's latest letter or her progress in school. But always, Morrison would remember that autumn morning when an 8-year-old prince had seen his tears and responded not with questions or curiosity, but with simple, profound kindness. That wordless gesture of sharing a chocolate biscuit had set in motion a chain of events that saved his daughter's life and reminded an entire royal household that true nobility comes not from titles or ceremony, but from the courage to care for others when they need it most. The guard who had once wept silently at his post now stood prouder and stronger, knowing that even in the darkest moments, human kindness could illuminate paths toward hope, healing, and home.